Paper of the session on wealth, income, work, and retirement. Are we there yet? Are you there yet? This topic has been of great interest in the last year or so. We've had the Occupy movement and citizens marching and having conversations about wealth inequality, and they seem primarily interested in the fairness issue. We've had politicians on the campaign trail either being defensive about it or being offensive about it, and so there's a lot of posturing and positioning on this particular issue of wealth and income inequality. We've had politicians claim that people are just jealous and envious of people with wealth. Others say that having wealth is a bad thing. We have plutocrats have been rebranded as job-rich creators as a way to blunt the idea of having money. And this is on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, families making $250,000 are lumped with plutocrats who make over $250 million. So basically what we have in this discussion of wealth and income inequality is a lot of discussion, but they're at the extremes. We don't have discussions that are nuanced and actually deal with fundamental issues. We also have the press and media basically parroting whatever is happening and whatever is said. And yes, the press and the media is supposed to report, but these are complicated issues, and there's parroting without insight, which is not very helpful. If we were to use a medical analogy, one can say that what's visible is wealth inequality. So we see the causes, we see symptoms, but we don't quite understand, or the public doesn't quite understand what's actually causing it. So, and the more voices that are raised with bias, the more complicated the situation gets. So one can think, are we putting Band-Aids, political Band-Aids, when in fact major surgery is needed? What this paper is going to try to do, hopefully, even though it's a 20-minute paper, and it's at least address the idea of there's some deeper fundamental issues that we need to start thinking about. For example, what creates severe income and wealth inequality? And then two, how do we as a society value work and fairness? And then three, will it cure itself? Or is that the natural order, a la Darwin? Now, one of the things we recognize is there's been a lot of work in this area. There's been some very thoughtful scholars who have provided a lot of data and analysis. And what this paper will try to do is discuss some of this secondary data and try to extract some insight and hopefully make a contribution to the public debate on these issues. So we're trying to add another piece of the puzzle and build on the work of previous authors and researchers. The specific objectives of this paper is to, one, step back from the political rhetoric and examine the data. And number one, we want to revisit what exactly is wealth and income, and have some discussion on work and retirement opportunities, and see how they relate to these concepts of wealth and income. So in other words, think of these four variables in a more fundamental way. The second objective is to examine whether there's clear evidence of wealth inequality, and if so, what are the trends? Is it just a one-time deal? Is this something new? Or has this been going on for a long time? So basically to examine the data, the evidence. And three, as part of our analysis, we'll talk about whether or not politicians and the press are actually providing serious and meaningful insight on these issues for the average American. Are they, in fact, disseminating accurate knowledge and insight on these very important topics, assuming that the average person is busy with work and family and doesn't have the resources to be as analytical as others, such as the press and politicians, can be. And the fourth is to talk a little bit about the policy implications based on the actual findings. So to go back to the medical analogy, can we start thinking about prescriptive measures concerning wealth and inequality? So, task number one, research objective one, wealth and income defined. When you have anecdotal conversation with people, even educated people, they use income and wealth interchangeably. In fact, they're not. They are correlated, but they're not interchangeable. And this is important because the differences between wealth and income has great ramifications on work and retirement. And as we go through this paper, hopefully this will become really obvious. So income is defined as wages, which is income for work done, plus other investments. And investments include capital gain, dividends, and so on. Now, wealth is defined as all the assets you own, so real estate, other kinds of assets, minus all the debt you owe. And hopefully this is a positive number, and it's large. Income generally is produced for most people whose bulk of their income come from wages while they're working. So someone who wants to retire, if their only input is income through wages, then when they stop working, they have very limited options for retirement. And it used to be people thought Social Security was their retirement. As we listen to the political discourse, we realize that this is not certain for people going forward. It's not a guarantee. And we also hear conversations from politicians about raising the retirement age. And one of the risks is that people may never be able to fully retire, depending on where they are on the wealth and income scale. So these are very, very important issues for many people. And unfortunately, as we go through this, we'll see that the majority of people are not in a comfortable place when it comes to wealth and income as they think about retirement. So this is another way to represent work, wealth, and retirement. Simply put, in a linear model, we think people work in order to earn income. And from their income, they pay debts and living expenses. And if there's any surplus, they save it. And the bottom line, this is really important, wealth increases with increases in savings and investment. However, if you're a low-income person or a lower-income person, and there's no surplus, all you're doing is paying debts and living expenses, there is no wealth accumulation occurring. There's been data that shows that in the last 5 years since the crash, we've had the stock market double, meaning it went up 100%. Well, if you didn't have investments, it doesn't matter that the stock market goes up 100%. 100% increase of zero is still zero. And this is a troubling issue, or it should be, for the government, for society, and for people. So wealth grows if there's surplus to save and invest. And the more wealth you have, it increases your quality of life, and it also increases retirement choices. So if one's done, that's very good. But if stage 2, wealth accumulation, doesn't occur when a person reaches the end of their work life, the ability to work, or they lose their jobs, then retirement looks very gloomy, because if someone has limited wealth or worse, negative wealth, then they have basically little or no retirement options. And one of the more tragic consequences of this is people who may never be able to retire or fully retire. So what is the evidence of wealth distribution?
You're at 11 minutes, so you know.
U.S. wealth distribution, 2009, this is after the crash. We see the top 1%, 35% of wealth. If we go around the circle, the pie, we notice that the bottom 80% has about 13% of wealth, which means that the top 20% have 87% of wealth. Obviously, one doesn't have to argue that there's inequality here. This is another chart showing inequality by income. This is a long-term chart, a trend chart on the top 1% share of pre-tax income. 1928, this is the year before the crash, the Great Depression. The crash occurred in 1929. The 1% had 23.9%. If you look at 2007, before the crash of 2008, we had 23.5%. So having all this concentration of wealth is not good for anyone. We noticed that 2 times when they peaked, what went next was not good news for the economy. This is another chart here where we have hourly wages. We noticed between 72 and 2009, the average hourly wage for a worker increased by less than $1. Why does this matter? Look at 2009, where the average CEO of S&P 500 company had $8.4 million in salary or paid. The top 50 who laid off people, their salary is close to 12 million. So in other words, if you're a CEO, you lay workers off, meaning that the same work gets done by fewer people, you benefit, your salary goes up. So there are fewer workers working more, they get paid less, and you get more. And so we're getting a picture where even income inequality now is driving wealth inequality in significant ways. That's one way it's changed from 1928. And this is a chart here showing that if you do a computation, the average worker makes $40,000. Basically, that person is in the floor when you do a bar chart comparing there. Here we have personal savings rate. In 1982, it was at a high of 10.9. 2005, it was low of 1.4. 2010, it started to go up, where people, after the crash, are spending less because of economic insecurity. And so what do we mean by wealth, income, and so on? A high-wage person with high investments, debt ratio very small, has little to worry about in terms of work, retirement. They have choices, and so their wages are high, the investments are great, assets are growing and limited. And for someone with huge savings and investments and assets growing, when they get ready to retire, they can live on other income. They don't need wages as part of that. If you go to low wages, low investment, with debt ratio large, we have the opposite, where income's small, So they were not saving because there was no surplus. In this case, think about what happened during the housing boom. People bought houses that were inflated, the prices, they had huge mortgages, the housing prices went down. Then, in fact, they ended up with negative wealth because they own assets that were less than their debt. And so this is a prime example of where people at the lower income are at risk for both retirement and quality of life. Another chart showing wealth distribution. The red is the top 1%, and this is 83 to 2007. What this should show you is it doesn't matter how you slice the data, when, where, there's some variation, but the story of significant wealth and income inequality is no myth. The data is real, and the finding is it is troubling, mainly because, as we saw previously, when you divide up the population into quintiles, you notice that the top 20% literally has 87% of the wealth. So it's not 47% that's in trouble, it's 80%. 80% of the population has less than 13% of wealth. And so what happens to those 80% when they try to retire and to maintain a life with any quality? This is a debt spending, and we notice there are people in politics who argue how bad it is. We notice that, in fact, during the Great Depression...
17 minutes.
Okay. We had federal spending during the Roosevelt years. The New Deal was very high. And in fact, federal spending as a percent of GDP is actually quite low now, in spite of all the political howling. So what are the implications? There's a lot of information here, so let's just sum it up. What's the implications for work, wealth, retirement, or way forward? Number one, income for most people comes in from work earned. So that 80%, they don't have huge investments and wealth accumulation through the other category. So in order to increase earned income, there's a lot of data that shows that, in fact, and actually I think I have a chart right here which will show that education does matter. So for example, this is the mean value of before tax family based on education. You know, this is just very raw, independent of major or anything. We see people with more education making more money. So if you want to influence this step, you need to invest in education and opportunity. And you also need to have tax policy that's fair and equitable. Because as we said before, for the lower income people, and lower meaning 80% actually of the population, the mortgage deduction is a huge way that people build equity. Most middle class families, their wealth, if they have any, is related in their home. And the reason they can afford a mortgage is they get a tax deduction for the mortgage. If that's taken away, you've taken away the one thing that exists now that helps those families to at least gain some equity and gain wealth. So we need to teach financial literacy at all levels to enhance learning and power of choices. So if people are more educated, they're earning more money, they can now invest in resources, assets that build wealth. However, even in this stage, you need education and tax policy that's fair and equitable. So you do not want to take away the mortgage deduction, which is the biggest deduction of people who can't afford tax attorneys and tax shelters. This is a simple thing. They know how to do it. They can do it themselves. If you have $250 million, you can hire people to find every little loophole in the tax to get the lowest possible tax. But you also need here to educate people on how to take the wealth they have and make it grow. Most people who have tremendous wealth, it's not that they just had wealth and they sat on it. They figured out a way to invest and have it grow. And you can only do this through education, tax policy, this fair and equitable recommendation here, fund nonprofit university programs to do non-credit and other. My co-author recommended we could start as early as a primary school using video games to teach economics to students where it's fun and why not. And if you do 1 and 2, if you help people become more educated, earn more, have more potential, learn how to accumulate wealth, understand wealth accumulation, how that works, then there's nothing to worry about in retirement. Because people are educated, they have good investments, and they can make good choices. One of the issues that's been debated now is the idea of Social Security being a voucher. That's the last thing we need to do, is to give old people vouchers or money where we have the same people who sold houses at outrageous prices, have people go into mortgages that were not good for them, taking these vouchers and investing it for people in risky assets in their retirement, and then losing it all, and the government saying, okay, we gave you the voucher, too bad, we're done. So what's the implications for work, wealth, and retirement a way forward? We do need public policy. We need people to be empowered, but the only way you empower them is through education on one end, where they can make their own choices. After all, it's a constitutional right to be able to be free to choose. And then finally, to have good tax policy that reinforce behavior that will make people productive citizens and not dependent on the state. Thank you.